Right, thank you so much again for joining me on this channel. As always, I'm very grateful for all your previous views, likes, subscriptions and shares. I thought for today we'd spend time looking at the just war theory. And I did my normal trick, and first of all I looked up on Google what the word just means, and it comes from the Latin and via the Old French. It basically means right, law. In other words, the just war theory is the correct way, the most moral way of conducting yourself during an armed conflict. And the history of the just war, I suppose, really has gone through a few stages. I think that's very important, just to underscore that there are records in Greece of this idea of how to conduct yourself during an armed conflict, and the theory we have now has come to us as well through Augustine. But it's Thomas Aquinas who's kind of credited with having the version that we have now. Okay, but I think that's important just to highlight that there's many ways you can say he was standing on the shoulders of giants. It wasn't as if he just sort of suddenly thought, I better write something about the just war theory and how to conduct ourselves. Many people and cultures had built up to this particular point. And one of the things I just want to say is that apologies, this is quite a long video, and normally what I do is that I go through and I sort of give you sort of 3 points to look at, or 3 sort of questions to hang on and do your own research. I'm not going to do that today, simply because I'm trying to streamline things a little bit. So apologies if you fall asleep a little bit through this video. So let's have a look at just and bellum, resort to war. In other words, what are the conditions that need to be laid down if a nation is going to go to war? Well, first of all, war must be declared by a proper authority. And the point that Aquinas was getting at here is well, there can't just be Bob down the road or Sandra on WhatsApp. If you're going to declare war, okay, it needs to come from a recognised institution or structure. Now, whether that, of course, could be a monarch. Of course, it could be some kind of perhaps a religious leader. It could be a democratically elected government. It could even be a government that's not democratically elected. So we're already nudging there at the corners of some of the things that some of the issues regarding just war theory. But the point is, there needs to be some kind of framework that is recognised, that is ordered when resorting to war. I suppose the other thing that Aquinas said is that intention must be to do good and overcome evil. So you're not going to war just to expand your empire. You're not going to war simply to get more resources, whether they be gold or oil. The idea is that you're trying to prevent an evil. You're trying to stop something bad that is happening. But even despite all that, war must be a last resort. You have to make sure that if you're going to go to war, you have tried possibly every other avenue there is. So we're looking at today's world, we look at things like how North Korea is undergoing things as economic sanctions to try and prevent it from furthering any of its weapons. We might look at, for example, how other nations may get involved. If there's 2 countries, there's a lot of tension, another nation may get involved as like a peace broker to try and bring the 2 sides around the table to talk. So it must be a last resort. I think the other thing as well, which is important, is that the good a war will do must outweigh the harm. And what you've got here is a little bit of, I suppose, of prediction. You've got to be like a clairvoyant fortune teller, because you're trying to work out if I, as a nation, if we do X, okay, are we sure that Y and Z will follow? Okay, and of course this does actually happen. It sounds very crude, but of course military leaders and governments will, if they're going to plan a particular military offensive, will say, well, there's probably a 60% chance that we might lose, 3,000 military personnel. If we do it this particular way, we may lose 40,000, but the actual mission may be achieved more quickly. And that sounds very crude, but this idea of making sure that the good overcomes the evil is a very important one. But it's all about weighing it up, isn't it? These balances. I think the other thing to say as well is that it must be possible to win. And for me, this is the most intriguing aspect of the just war theory. Because if we look here at this map now, in World War II, this map represents roughly the peak of Nazi Germany's land grab during World War II in Europe. Okay, and just the tip of North Africa as well. Now, if you look at a country like the United Kingdom, it looked pretty bleak. What I find interesting is that under the just war theory, okay, it must be possible to win. And you look at the UK's position, you think, well, it really wasn't that great. Remember, at this point, the United States hadn't entered the war. Okay. Yes, there was Russia, my apologies, the Soviet Union, but it really did look as though it was going to be a pretty dismal outcome for the United Kingdom. Now, this isn't needless patriotic tub thumping. What I'm trying to put across is actually, at what point did leaders say, well, okay, fair enough, maybe it is time to end this war, and actually we shouldn't get involved in fighting this war. Well, what if people's human rights are being seriously violated? What if there is a fear that actually if you don't intervene militarily, then it could be your nation or your livelihood and your peace threatened next. So I just find that a really interesting one. And of course, one of the things that you may have seen around is that keep calm and carry on poster. Well, that was actually made and designed by the British government at the time of World War II in case Nazis did actually invade Britain. And the idea was that these posters would be put up to say, keep calm everyone and carry on. But for me, it's the most intriguing one because I guess for me personally, I think if whatever the cause is, if you're fighting a really good cause, you just keep going no matter what the odds are. Now, it's also important to think about one's conduct in war, jus in bello, and how you actually behave. Now, your force should be in proportion. So think about in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, when the evil Empire used the Death Star to destroy Princess Leia's planet of Alderaan. Of course, that's a hugely disproportionate amount of force, and it may sound a bit silly using an example from science fiction, but it does happen in the real world. In 1999, there was what's known as the Kosovo War. This was where NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is a coalition of countries from the North Atlantic, decided to intervene and prevent the Serbian military structure from persecuting Kosovans. Okay, and during that, force was proportional. So when, for example, they were bombing significant and strategic places in Serbia, so for example a power station, they use what were called soft bombs. Now, soft bombs are not bombs that are made out of foam, but what they are is that they would fire the missile and it would explode above, say, a power station, and lots of graphite iron filings would come down and that would disrupt the power station. Okay, so what you're doing is that you're still knocking out the power, okay, which is what your aim is, so it makes it difficult to run military stations and all that kind of thing, but you're not completely destroying it, so therefore you're not killing innocent civilians, people who work there, and you're not entirely demolishing a building which would have to be rebuilt anyway when you get to peace. So I think that's really interesting, isn't it, that that force does need to be in proportion, and for me it's a very clear example of how it can be carried out. Now, just a few bits and bobs that I just wanted to raise about the just war theory. Okay, these aren't all my points. Okay, some of them are out there in literature and on the internet. Well, first of all, it is just a theory, and that's the point. You cannot open up the Christian holy book, the Bible, and go, oh, look, there's the just war theory. It is just that, a theory. And I think what's interesting as well is that we've got to bear in mind that some people are pacifists. Some communities do not believe in fighting at all. And of course, pacifism is not just something that happens in the religious world. Okay, it's very important to remember this. You can be a pacifist and not have any religious beliefs. Okay, so as we know now, some religious groups do have an entirely pacifist view. So, for example, the Quakers are very strong pacifists. But I think it's important to remember that just because the just war theory was created by a famous Christian scholar, okay, in the 1200s, doesn't necessarily mean that all Christians subscribe to it. Now, of course, the thing as well, human beings are very clever with language. We can stretch words. We can look for loopholes and try and find ways around things. And of course, the theory can be applied to any war to appear to make it just. And of course that feeds into the next point, which is that both sides will apply it in such a way that their claim is apparently just. So you've got nation A versus nation B, and those in nation A will be saying, well, of course this war is just, we need to defend ourselves. And nation B will be saying, well, of course we need this is a just war because we need to defend ourselves. And of course, yet again, we come back to this idea of language. And the more I talk about this, the more I realise that actually maybe I need to do a video on the use of language in religion. Also, don't forget this idea of the principle of the sanctity of life. Okay, demands that all acts of deliberate killing are forbidden. So think about how life is viewed as special, sacred and holy. Again, don't have to be religious to hold that view. That's very important. But if you think about how precious life is, then actually you can see why a pacifist view is so attractive, and some would say the absolute necessity. Okay, but even just think about then the 10 Commandments, where one of those is about not killing. So think about the idea of the sanctity of life. And of course, when the just war theory was put together, okay, the existence of weapons of mass destruction were not around. They just simply did not exist. So things such as nuclear warheads or things about drone warfare, it wasn't there. Okay, and of course there's no way that Aquinas could have seen that. Now, one of my favourite things as well is talking about just post bellum, creating a just peace. And there's a fantastic guy called Brian Arend who works at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Waterloo, and he's particularly interested in what happens after a war has concluded. So I just wanted to share his theory with you, if I may, just to conclude. And first of all, he says there's got to be a just cause for termination. So when a war has ended, okay, there needs to be some kind of formal apology. There needs to be, in other words, let's call them the aggressor, a way of recognising what they've done is wrong, okay, and they need to make sure that that is formally recognised. And there has to be an acceptance of a reasonable punishment. Okay, look at that word, reasonable. And many of you will be aware too that after World War I, with the Treaty of Versailles, there's a very, very strong argument that the Treaty of Versailles helped to cause World War II, because it was perhaps too punitive against Germany. I think the second thing as well is right intention. Okay, so we'll call them winners and losers. My apologies for the crude language there, but just for simplicity. So the winners of the war have got to make sure that they don't go out for revenge. Okay, so things, for example, war crimes. It's not just that war criminals should be persecuted from the losing side. If there's any war crimes on the winning side, they need to make sure as well that they are held to account. And there needs to be as well some kind of public declaration and legitimate authority. Okay, so what that means is that it's not just enough for the winners to create a framework of what peace will be like. Okay, there needs to be sort of a neutral, if ideally legitimate authorities. It might be through the United Nations, and of course those acceptance of peace needs to come as well from a legitimate authority. So that can be quite interesting. So if you're the losing nation, that could be quite interesting, because you may be in a sense of chaos. You may not have a stable government. So where does that come from? And I guess it highlights that these things can often take time. There also needs to be a sense of discrimination, okay, and it's quite unusual to see the word discrimination used in a positive sense. But what that means is that when it comes to the winners and losers thinking about and discussing where to go forward, there needs to be a distinction made between political leaders, military leaders and civilian populations as well. And what that means is that if you are going to hand out reasonable punishments or sanctions to the losing nation, then well, actually what that means is well, it's got to be quite careful, because you want to make sure you're not harming a civilian population who, by the way, may have had nothing to do with the war, may not even voted for perhaps those leaders who took them to war in the first place. So it's a reminder of the need to make a distinction between those who were involved in the war and those who were not. And also, I think what I like about Brian's sort of post-war peace plan is this idea of proportionality. Okay, you cannot, those who are vanquished, they're losers as well. They can't be victims of the winners going, right, that's it, we're going to make sure that you don't ever allowed to do this, you can't do this, you won't be able to have access to this. There can't be any witch hunts. It needs to be proportional. It needs to be a case of building that positive dialogue. Anyway, thank you so much for spending time with me on this video. I know there was a lot in here, but I do hope it sparked an interest in you regarding the just war theory. As always, thank you so much for watching, and of course, enjoy your learning. Hi there, thank you so much again for joining me on this channel. What was that?